panel item, which is from Planning and Building, and it's a discussion on whether changes should be made to the alternative owner-builder ordinance. So at this time, I'd like to turn this over to Director Ford.
Thank you, Chair Bass. John Ford with the Planning and Building Department. Joining me is Natalie Duke with County Counsel's Office to present a discussion of the alternative owner-builders ordinance. There we go. So this really has come about because there has been a situation with one home that was issued a permit under the alternative owner-builder ordinance, and it's raised a lot of questions surrounding how the AOB is done, what kinds of inspections are required, and really the appropriateness of the ordinance and whether or not it's been abused. So what we'd like to do today is just give a very quick overview to the board and the public of the provisions of the alternative owner-builder ordinance, present some alternatives, and then allow the board to give some consideration to what may be done or should be done, if anything at all. So the AOB ordinance was established first and foremost to encourage people, largely in rural areas, to obtain building permits. This was also identified as being an important contributor in providing affordable housing within the housing element, and the housing element specifically encourages the continued use of the AOB ordinance. The way it goes about this is it provides design flexibility, material flexibility, and reduced permitting costs in order to obtain building permits. The AOB ordinance is limited to areas outside of community services districts. So any place where there's water or sewer available, the AOB ordinance is not available for use. One of the things that has been brought up is the AOB ordinance only requires one inspection by statute, although it does give provisions that additional inspections can be required. It also provides a longer time
Supervisor
frame.
Bone has a question, I believe. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So with the one inspection, does that include the electrical, sewer, everything? Because I'm hearing from a couple AOBs that they got more
I can't do
inspections
this.
than one.
I'm just saying.
Excuse me, I'm going to deal with it. Thank you. Go ahead, Supervisor Bone. And then after that, we'll have staff do their entire presentation and ask questions. That's okay. Go ahead. Just take care of this one question. And
I just got to follow up me. So it is always one inspection, or sometimes are there more than one?
Sometimes more than one. I think there are builders who ask for additional inspections. There are circumstances that the code provides when there are extenuating circumstances associated with the site that additional inspections are necessary. Frankly, that's an ambiguity that exists within the ordinance right now.
Thank you.
Okay, and so we'll hold all the other questions till you get done with your actual presentation.
Thanks. So one of the really important, I want to go back and make sure I mentioned that it does allow a longer time frame for a building permit to be active and to allow the owner-builder to complete the work. It's 5 years as opposed to what is normally a year. And so there is a lot of latitude there. I want to also point out, and this is really important, that Safe Homes provisions, which the board recently renewed, are often implemented through AOB. Because the homes that were constructed and are being permitted now would not be able to be permitted under the current building code. And so Safe Homes is often, or I'm sorry, I've got that backwards, AOB is often critical for the permitting of safe homes. There is also a unique transfer provision within AOB that identifies that upon sale of the property and transfer of the property, that the person purchasing the property is required to either sign a agreement saying that they're going to comply with the provisions of the AOB permit, or that the site, the building, is going to be brought into compliance with the current building code. This is a little bit embarrassing to say, but in the history of the AOB ordinance, we're not aware that this has ever been implemented. So I wanted to briefly point out that over the last 5 years, there have been a total of 628 building permits that have been issued. Of those, 110 are AOB permits, which is about 17.5% of the total. The size of the AOB homes ranges from the normal, very small, very affordable homes, 18 less than 1,000 square feet, 50 between 1,000 and 2,000, 25 between 2,000 and 3,000, and homes. There's about 17 homes that have been permitted that are over 3,000 square feet. I put an asterisk in there because there are 16 of the homes, of the 25 homes between 22,000 and 22,999 square feet that were actually less than 2,500 square feet. And then you can see that the AOB permits are, except for in District 4, are really spread across the county. The highest number obviously is in District 2, but in District 3 and 5 we're fairly close, and then District 1 had a few fewer. So what do all those numbers mean? That the AOB ordinance has been being used to either produce affordable or at least reasonably sized homes. 84 of the 110 homes that were permitted under AOB were less than 2,500 square feet. They're spread across the county. Nearly 1 in 5 building permits issued over the last 5 years has been for AOB. I think the numbers are probably a little bit inflated. In fact, some numbers that I looked at, in 2018 we had the most AOB permits at 35, and that probably is a direct correlation to the Safe Homes program being approved in 2017. So we've probably seen a few more AOB permits directly related to the Safe Homes program. That's an important consideration in this. In terms of alternatives for the board, they range all the way from making absolutely no change in the program at all to undoing the AOB ordinance altogether. That would not be staff's recommendation at this time. We would identify that some feasible recommendations that would prevent real abuse of the ordinance would be to set a cap on unit size relative to the AOB, or to require more inspections, or to do away with AOB for new construction, which would allow its free and unencumbered use for safe homes. One of the things could be a hybrid of these various ideas, which would be that no change for houses under 2,500 square feet, and 2,500 square feet is simply a placeholder for discussion purposes. But then houses that are larger than that, we could require more normal inspections of the house, which would also include taking a look at the grading, taking a look at the location and seeing if there's sensitive resources there. One of the other things that is not included in this but probably should be considered is, given the fact that the Safe Homes program does include this provision for transfer of property and transfer of the responsibility to the new occupant, that something should probably be recorded on the property indicating that it was approved under the Safe Homes or Alternative Owner Builder program, sorry. So that really concludes staff's presentation. Be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Supervisor Bone.
Thanks, John. I think everybody can say they had an outpouring of opposition from a lot of the folks that live more than the 20% that are out there. And then the 678, was it building permits in the last 5 years? Was that
628.
28? I knew there was something in there. People have to understand that's just in the unincorporated area. So there is some housing taking place over the last 5 years. But with that being said, if we were going to simplify this without politicizing it, in a better term, what would be if we took the AOB, left it the same, increased inspections for all units over I'll start at 35 because somebody's going to want to take it down. A lot of these houses are off the grid, so they like larger great rooms because they create their own entertainment in a lot of areas. And their families are up there. And it also comes with a, as you said, something on the title that says when it does come time to sell, you are buying a AOB house that may not meet urban building codes, but has met the certain, and obviously they're going to look at the house before they buy it. But I mean, to simplify and make as little changes as possible, because again, we're reacting to one instance. And the other thing I would do, just so this doesn't get taken advantage of, you are only allowed one AOB every 5 years. So you can't use it, and I don't know if you can do that. But I mean, just for a starting point, and everybody can say what dumb ideas all those are. But have we had a lot of AOB complaints up until the last 2 months? I mean, out of the 100 and some odd that we've issued over the last 5 years, have we had appeals or a myriad of complaints on any of the other AOBs?
We've really only had 2 AOB complaints recently. They both had to do with larger homes.
Okay.
I would also just like to point out that one of the things the board recently did was when we modified the accessory dwelling unit provisions, we allowed that a second unit, accessory dwelling unit, could be constructed under the AOB provisions. And that was an expansion of what could be allowed under AOB. We also reduced the time separation from 5 years to 2 years. 5 years was dual standard, reduced it down to 2. But it can go back to 5.
But with what is going on and with the people that live outside of the CSD situations and everything else, and the lack of housing that we are experiencing, I think the last thing we want to do is be putting on more restrictions that we've already issued out there to make it almost impossible to build anything. And I think the people in the Hitherlands and the rural, the backlanders, however it may be, they have chosen a lifestyle. They want to build their houses. They're not going to build them unsafely because they're going to be owner occupied, or, you know, and so I'm just wondering if there's somewhere in there we can come to a happy compromise so we're not saddling the people that are already out there. And maybe if people feel like this is a program that's being taken advantage of, we can take those distinct advantages out of there. And I know this discussion will go on, but I thought I'd throw out a starting point.
Supervisor Bushnell.
Director Ford, do you know, out of the 9 homes that were 3,000 to 4,000 square feet and the 8 homes that were over 4,000 square feet, were they all new construction?
Yeah, only new construction was included on these charts.
Oh, okay. So with Supervisor Bone saying about the increased inspections, would a thought process be that that would be only for new construction and not already existing that would fall under the Safe Homes Act?
Primarily focusing on new construction, yes.
Okay. And what would increased inspections look like?
Well, we included a list in the staff report, and a lot of those are normal inspections currently. But certainly, I think it's important that there be an inspection of the site before any permits are issued, and do setback analysis, and do a normal sensitivity analysis to see if there are important resources to be protected there. That's a normal part of the building process now.
And that process currently doesn't happen under AOB?
Correct.
And how much time would that increase the permitting process? Because
for an inspection, I'm going to say just a week.
Okay.
It's a matter of scheduling the inspection. I could say a day, but then if it took 3, people would be mad at me if I say a week and it's 3 days or a day.
Okay, so when you go in and you pull a permit and you schedule your inspection, it happens within a week? Because,
It happens usually within a day.
okay.
Any other supervisors? Supervisor Wilson?
Thanks. I have a few questions and comments. One is, the purpose of this was to create and maintain low-cost housing in the county. And I guess for me, at some point, 2,500 square feet, 3,000, 4,000, that doesn't, I'm not sure, in 1984 or whenever this was done, or 85, I was here. I was a teenager, and I remember this discussion. It was really focused, and living in southern Humboldt, it was really focused around people building smaller houses and living spaces. And I don't think at that time 2,500 square feet was considered the average house anywhere. Matter of fact, the 1,800 square feet was a ranch home, and so I think we've really changed. We've really changed about what that is and what the impact is with relationship to footprint. So the footprint of a 1,000 square foot home is very different than one of 2,500 square feet. It's actually exponential in its increase in its footprint because of the grading and those sorts of things. So I have some concerns about sort of the what the intent of this ordinance was then versus its application in the current context. And I think there's some discussion about that. And certainly when we're talking about houses of that size that maybe aren't necessarily, meeting Title 24 and the, our climate impacts associated with that and think about this. So I think size is important in this discussion, but then also I think grading. I want to say, I have heard from contractors that have a lot of concern about what they've seen in terms of what's been built. I've also heard from tribes about the concerns in terms of the lack of review in association with this. And so I'm just kind of, it's just kind of an overall, I just want to put that out there that there's concerns with relationship just to the impacts. Then I think we also, when you talked about transfer of ownership, in the ordinance it actually talks about the builder has to live in it. It even includes renting it. If it's rented in the ordinance, if the home is rented to somebody, then they're supposed to either have a report to the building inspector or the home needs to be brought to code. So I want to be clear that that's what's in the ordinance, and that any change in occupancy is supposed to, these two things are supposed to happen. And if we have if we just extrapolate 30 houses a year for 35 years, I think that's somewhere around 1,000 homes. It's hard to imagine that every single one of these homes is still occupied by the builder that built it. And the reason I bring this up is because I believe we take on a certain liability as the county when we allow for non-standard homes to be built, when we allow them to be not up to uniform building code. And we have to balance that liability that we take on especially if folks are not, because it's explicitly enumerated in the ordinance that the liability is on the builder, and there's a lot of language in here that's really key about that, and they have to sign a waiver and do all these things so that we don't take on that liability. But if we are not actually enforcing or have a mechanism to move that forward through the system, then you could have 2 or 3 owners down the line thinking that they have bought a house or they are renting a house without disclosure that it wasn't built to uniform building code, and then who's liable in that situation? And I'm not asking you to answer this question because we're not really supposed to receive that kind of advice, legal advice in this context, but it is something that we have to concern ourselves with, because when I say we, I mean every other citizen in the county has to take, ultimately takes that liability, and we have to be responsible to everybody else in that situation. And I want to figure out a way that we can get there. So that's why, for me, the bigger the structure, the more liability we assume. And so I want to make sure, if we're talking about affordability and liability, that we're being responsible, I think, in that way. The other thing is, I think, a little bit of in looking at the code with relationship to whether a building is within a jurisdiction or a community services district. I think it also says in there whether it's also within their, not just within but within their sphere of influence as well. So I assume that that's being reviewed, and it also says what's foreseeable. So if it's foreseeable that a housing site could be within in the future, foreseeable future, that a housing site could be within, a community services district, then I think that's something that should be looked at, because obviously we're getting some of these that are within certainly line of sight of community services districts. The frequency of permit, I think, was interesting because we just discussed that. It's like, if people are doing these multiple times, they're living in it and then moving and then living in it again and then moving, and the transfer of liability hasn't been occurring, then we have a big gap in the way this ordinance is written and the way it's applied, and it's gaping from my perspective. And we have to think about that, and then the fire safety element of this. Many of these structures and this is 30 years ago or more. The fire safety element of this, I don't think, is updated to current standards, and I question our liability to allow for structures to be built in high fire zones, knowing that we're not meeting the standards that the state is requesting of us. With relationship to this and the liability associated with this. Again, it comes back to us. If we're allowing that, then we have to balance between what we're allowing and what we want to get out of it and what the benefit we're going to get as a community. It was also under inspections. There's this: structures of conventional or simple construction shall be inspected at a single inspection. And I'm not sure what that even means. If it's not built to code, how is it conventional? That is not, to me, that's a concern I have. I discussed the changes in occupancy. Again, and then with the record keeping, this is on us. In the record keeping, it says, it shall be the duty of the chief building official to keep a permanent record of all pertinent transactions under this chapter and to render a monthly report to the Board of Supervisors concerning such transactions. I'm pretty sure that's probably maybe never happened.
I don't believe it has.
Yeah. Then it's the enforcement of this. I mean, we're supposed to be under this ordinance. Basically, if the owner if the builder has moved out of this and either sold it or rented it, then under these provisions, the building becomes a public nuisance. I mean, under the provisions, that's how I read this, because it's potentially a danger to people who don't know that it's not built to these codes. It's in the ordinance, it's written in here. And so I think, there's a lot about this ordinance that gives me pause. But still going back to the part where we need housing and we need affordable housing, and that's really where the focus, I think, needs to be. And maybe there's a place where this can go, but I think that there's some real concerns that and some pause that we should take with relationship to this. And I'm happy to have more discussion. Thanks.
Supervisor Bone? I didn't know. Steve, do you have your, I didn't see. Okay. Supervisor Bone?
You know, Mike, I agree with a lot of that, and the liability has got to be, so we've been, how many, John, there's been 2 instances with AOB where we sued on both of them?
I don't think we've been sued on the AOB at all.
Okay. And this is the liability issue, because 2 weeks ago, we overruled 765,000 square feet of buildings out on a peninsula in a tsunami tide zone, and liability wasn't an issue. To make chances, we have to take chances. I don't think they're extreme. I think everything we do is a liability. But we also have to weigh the facts of the 20% of the building permits are out there. And if we make it tougher, my biggest fear, we're not even going to get you got to remember, a lot of these are being built outside the realm. That's why I said maybe the larger homes, and ranch is not a size, ranch is a style. So I live, in an 1,800 square foot ranch style home. It's not on a ranch, it's on a very small lot. Other people up here live in acreage and things like that, but I live on a very small lot. But what I'm saying is, outside these community services district, I think we would be doing a disservice both to the people that live in AOB homes, want to build an AOB home, and the ones that don't, if we start taking the tools away for them to do that. So if we're going to go over, so that's why I limited the 3,000 square feet was a compromise. It's even, I guess you could even go to 2,500 by the numbers. We're still at over 80% of the homes. And giving these people the opportunity to live on their houses a little bit cheaper, provide housing, maybe an auxiliary dwelling unit. This has not been an issue in 35 years till we had a problem between Eureka and Arcata. And all of a sudden now we need to change everything because of one situation. That was a situation that was a calamity of errors, misgivings, however you want to look at it, that should have never happened. But I don't think we changed the whole flow of the river that has been a working situation over one error. We fixed the one error. We fixed the one error, and we fixed that right, so it's best for the community. But to change a whole 35-year program of AOB, which are 15 to 20% of the homes being, anywhere between 16 to 20% of the homes being built, and has been a somewhat successful program. And if we are going to change this to an extreme where we are going to hamstring the people that are building these out, I would love to know what the acreage is all these AOBs were sitting on, the minimum acreage, maximum acreage, but a lot of them are remote. They're going to go back to building houses that have no oversight. And that's why we have the safe homes. That's why we have these programs, so we can bring these people into the fold and bring them into some form of legality so they feel like that they are part of, so we can work with them. I don't know what that looks like, but the sky isn't falling because one thing fell out of the sky. We need to address that. But this is a program that has been working. This is a program. And I don't know what it is. I don't get a lot of these. I got a lot of emails. I got a lot more phone calls, but that said, please do not limit this. And Ellen Taylor and I don't agree on a lot of things, but she gives me a lot of input. But she has a pretty good pulse on rural, at least in the Matola Valley, and they're looking for no changes. I'm looking at some changes to calm some people's nerves, but I would be comfortable with no changes in the AOB because I hate reacting to one thing. I hate knee-jerk reactions. We've got to change this immediately. Maybe we take time and see if this is a huge problem or is this a small problem. But I don't have a problem with a 3,500 square foot house getting more than one inspection, or some of the things what our director has said we could do. Are we following all the guidelines that were brought to us 35 years ago? Probably not. Maybe we could fine tune those a little bit. But this is a program that has worked for rural Humboldt. And we have 2.6 million acres, and only about 100, less than 100 of it, I believe, is incorporated. 120, something like that, you know. So I'm just saying there's a lot more in CSDs, but I think putting more hamstrings on rural Humboldt, I think is, and the fire danger, how many AOBs have caught on fire? In all honesty, people that live in the hills put out a lot more fires than they start. Lightning, chains, things like that. So I think to throw everything on a rural home builder, I can't agree with. I'm not a rural liver, so I can't say that. I'm a downtowner, I guess, so.
Well, I know I had Supervisor Wilson, but Supervisor Bushnell, I saw her up too. Do you mind if? Okay. I was trying to see who I saw first, and I wasn't sure.
I think, we have to ask ourselves a bit of, if someone's building a 3,500 square foot home, we're then assuming that they can't afford to build something that's livable to code. I think that's something we have to really ask ourselves, especially when everybody else who lives within all these services districts has to play by those rules. And to just say, well, someone lives outside of service district, then they have different rules associated with that. It's a concern. I'm just saying we have to bring balance into that. And I will say that it's true the code does say you can build the ADU, which is 1,200 square feet associated with this. And I think that's I have to say, it's like, I live in a house that's smaller than 1,200 square feet. I've raised 2 children. There was the family before me with 4 children. I'm going to say that what's affordable housing, again, we have to balance with what we're willing and to understand is what we're trying to promote versus what's being taken advantage of in all of these other situations. And I do think that there have been, although this, the situation that kind of, bubbled to the surface here, I do know that there have been issues where folks have really had a lot of concerns with relationship to the safety of these structures and within these communities, but also just like especially around grading. I have to tell you, like, I've really heard some horror stories around grading that has not been inspected under the same purview. So those are my concerns. Whatever we do today will it'll be what it is. But I from my perspective, I think I would propose a moratorium of anything over 1,200 square feet, and over. I would ask the director to give a number with relationship to cubic yards, because I do think that we need to think about that, because I've heard of home sites that were that have just been absolutely huge amounts of grading, and the impacts from that. I mean, that's kind of where we're at. Why we're at where we're at now is because we didn't have those oversights with relationship to this one house, and so those are I'm throwing that out there as I think that's reasonable, and then we have that moratorium on the size. At some point, then we can bring this back for further discussion on sort of the details of how we kind of get ourselves through the disclosures and all these other things, because I don't think today we're going to be able to get ourselves through all that. So I'm throwing it out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Supervisor Bushnell.
Thank you, through the chair. So recognizing what you say, Supervisor Wilson, your reality isn't everybody's. And while you wanted to live in a 1,200 square foot house and raise 2 children, that is considered a pretty small size in today's world. And also, you know, first of all, have you seen any of it, or is it hearsay? But you act like these homes are being built and they're shambles and shacks, and they're not. Most of them are not. I'm going to finish before you respond, because that's what you said. I would ask Director Ford that with the Safe Homes Act, that no change would be for structures already built in the rural areas over the Safe Homes Act. That would be preference, correct? Because we really need to protect that.
Yes, I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, and then secondly, if we were to put a square footage of, say, 3,000 square feet or small or larger on new construction, and an inspection process, could it be a pre-site, a middle, and an ending, so that it follows somewhat within the AOB ordinance? And what would that look like?
I'm not sure what I'm not sure the question. What would it look
So
like?
when I asked you and you emailed me what inspections look like for traditional, there's a lot that goes on there. And under the AOB ordinance, you do a one, right? A final.
Typically do a one. I think there used to be more, and it was really based probably on the contractor or the owner builder who was working on the property, wanting to make sure things were inspected. I think that, you know, the pre-site is important. I think electrical plumbing is important. The structural is important. Those can be done at the same time.
Okay. Does that take away, though, from the AOB? Thoughts?
Well, the thing that takes away from the AOB is the fee that's collected versus the amount of time staff spends on it.
So is there an availability if we increase inspections and to adopt that fee into that process?
Yes, there is that possibility.
And also, so coming in and getting a permit, and I understand you say that it should happen the next day, but it doesn't always, and sometimes it's up to 3 weeks, and anyways, going forward, it can sometimes happen. So one of the thought processes with AOB is the time, you know, to save time, right? Or is that not a true statement?
I don't think AOB was really about time.
It was about fee structure?
It was about encouraging people to come in and get permits.
Okay.
Because in the rural areas, there was a tendency, especially in the back to land movement, to not get permits.
Right.
So this really was an effort to make it very easy for people to come in using alternative materials, alternative practices, to come in and get a building permit.
Okay, thank you for that. And then I wanted to ask about the grading stuff. So with the AOB, can you make your house site on new construction without grading, without a grading permit?
So sometimes the grading permit is included within the construction permit, the building permit. And so I think the concern here is that if you're doing significant grading and you're not requiring an engineering, a geotech report, you're not requiring an engineer sign off, you're putting a house, a structure on a fill that's not an engineered fill.
So is there a way, without making it too restrictive, to say by slope or by fill?
Yes.
So I would maybe go there, but not in general. But I do think, you know, if you're putting a house on a 40-degree slope, that's probably a problem. And then I do think fill can be a problem if it's not an engineered fill. But trying to stay within the confines of the AOB and making it affordable for people is where I'm leaning more. And I absolutely do not want to see this for houses that are existing and anything that would fall within the Safe Homes Act for myself, for my district.
Supervisor Wilson?
First, I never said anything about
Yes, you
shacks
did.
and shambles. I never used those words. Please don't put words into my mouth. So, I will say that I appreciate the conversation around the grading and the engineering. And that actually speaks pretty much to a lot of what this is that some of these structures under normal conditions will require some engineering, and that doesn't happen here. And I appreciate that, again, that owners and that are building homes and wanting to live in them, that is fine. I mean, I think that's reasonable. And again, going back to, I received the email from Ellen, and she actually specifically mentioned small, efficient homes. And I think that we're losing track of that in this. The idea that that homes are built, there, we have a whole list in our staff report here of, inspections that don't occur that could occur. Gas line tests, basically the electric, and you have the setback inspection in there, and some of these other things. I think we do need to probably have some of that included in how we move forward with this. And again, I know just because we haven't had litigation around this yet, doesn't mean that we shouldn't protect ourselves from litigation in the future. And I want to be prudent about that, and yeah, I want to make sure that we're responsible. The other part about this is, whatever changes we make, is there a review outside of our institution that has a review? Like, is there a state review that occurs when we make any of these changes?
Yes. If we were to modify this, it would need to go to Housing and Community Development to determine if the alternatives that are being proposed are appropriate.
Supervisor Bone.
John, in a Cliff Note version, when somebody comes in and wants to get that permit for an AOB, do they just come in and say, I want to build an AOB, or do they have to give you an idea of a grading plan, a building, a sketch, a footprint, a diagram of what they're going to do? Because you got a different email that I did from Ellen, because I don't see where it says small. But I don't think we can sit here, and I think we're telling people if we go 3,000 feet, we're telling them what they can live in. I don't think I want to tell anybody you can't live in anything bigger than I live in. I think it's great that we live usually we all live in houses we could afford at the time we bought them. And then if we can expand, if we're fortunate enough, we do that. If not, kids grow away, and then the house grows back into perfectly good size, or we live in the garage. But with that, most of the owner builds are, like I said, they tend to have a lower carbon footprint because they use a lot of the materials they have already. But I understand fully that we need to protect ourselves from litigation. But short of wrapping our whole population in bubble wrap and telling them never to leave home, we're never going to be able to stop litigation. Because we have one lawyer for every 352 people in the United States or something like that. So we're never going to, we're never going to stop litigation, because that's how they make their money. But protecting ourselves is right, and we have protected ourselves to a certain extent because we haven't been sued in 35 years for our AOB program. Now that there's the potential, and we're sitting up here talking about, hey, they could sue us, that will probably open the floodgates. I agree. But with that being said, if we make the minor changes, like go to a 3,250 square foot or a 3,000 square foot, which is not a McMansion by any means, and I like I said, I live in an 1,800 square foot house. It's what I could afford. Paid $200,000 for it. But when we do this and we don't make changes, and then you guys can up, like you said, maybe 2 inspections, and then how long do they have to live in it? Let me get that clarified again.
There's no residency requirement. It's just that the same person can't pull AOB permits more often than it's currently every 2 years.
Is that considered a major change if we double that to 4 years? So it isn't abused, or people don't get the perception it's being abused?
I think that's a fairly easy change.
And then titles and everything else, I don't know if I want to put something on the title, but I think most of this comes out, and you have to disclose that you're moving into an AOB house when you buy it. A realtor I talked to said yes, but maybe not. Maybe you, but
I think under real estate disclosure requirements, the ethical thing to do is to disclose.
What I'm saying.
well, okay.
subliminally.
And with that being said, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But I've only bought 8 or 10 pieces of property in my lifetime, and every one of them I viewed and got an inspection. So I'm pretty sure somebody's going to come look at it besides me, because I don't know anything. And most people are going to look at it and say, deem it a responsibly built structure to live in. Maybe it is not to urban standards. Maybe it is not to urban standards. But I don't really know if we need to change a program that hasn't been problematic except for one seems to be instance that is taking on a life of its own. So I just, if maybe in a year we get 4 more of these and, and it hits the fan, I'd be the first one to eat crow and say, hey, maybe we need to do something more. But I don't see an issue, and putting restrictions on any building and housing right now, I think sends a terrible message. Liability be damned.
So, excuse me, we don't have, thank you, I know. Do that little thing, thank you. So, no worries. Supervisor Madrone and then Bushnell. Bushnell.
Thank you, Chair Bass. Well, in full disclosure, I've taken out 2 AOB permits over the years, and I found it to be a really excellent process. In my case, and I think many people's case, it was really just a way to reduce the permit fees. I still did everything to code because I wanted to be able to say that if and ever I wanted to sell it, which I doubt I ever will, but it just seemed to me it made sense to build a code. But I also have lived in a wiki-up for 4 years out in Honeydew. That was basically just poles that were made into a basket with tarps over the top. And it had indoor plumbing, believe it or not. So I've been around long enough to remember the United Stand movement that happened in the 1970s. They created this push for an AOB ordinance. I actually had multiple inspections, but not nearly as many as if you do a normal building permit. I think it was they needed to come before the walls had sheetrock to see the electrical, to see the plumbing, to see the structural elements before I sealed them up with sheetrock. I didn't find it onerous. And again, the fees were less by doing AOB, and that was really my primary motivator because we were poor and we were trying to stretch every dollar. But I've lived in situations and been around a lot of people that have built structures where they came into town and found whatever pieces of plywood were left over behind the store somewhere. And I think Ellen Taylor's letter spoke very eloquently to people being really creative and coming up with materials, rock on site, whatever it might be, to build a home for their family. And I fully support that. I really do not want to see us throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, here, simply because one site got out of control. I think there was actually another one. Did the big house that went in up on the hill up above Redwood Creek on the ridge line, that was also AOB, I believe.
Correct.
And it had massive grading and all kinds of things. So it's not just one. There have been a few, but there are always these really big things that are literally 8,000, 7,000, 10,000 square feet. I don't see a problem with saying, how about anything over 3,000 square feet goes through the normal process? Supervisor Bowen offered 35, you said 3. You know, if you're building something over 3,000 square feet, you probably have the funds to actually go through the normal process and get a regular building permit and get the inspections and all that stuff. But things vary for people. They really do, quite a bit. But I just think that this was ideally meant for people building their own homes and doing it as cheaply as they possibly could with the materials and resources they had available to themselves. So I'm not looking to do a lot of modifications. Like I said, I do think, you know, a moratorium on things over 3,000 might be good. If we want to make a lot of changes, it sounds like we would need to bring something back, and I think even Supervisor Wilson suggested that, because we have to be able to see how it fits in with housing and community development. Is that correct, HCD?
Yes.
Yeah. But I do think, you know, right now in the ordinance, there is in fact a clause in the ordinance that requires a seller to disclose to the buyer and the buyer to sign a piece of paper that goes into the file, into that parcel's file that says, I'm aware I'm buying a house that wasn't built to code. Why wouldn't we want to do that? I mean, I agree that there is some liability here. When we have something in law and we're not actually enforcing that, it absolutely puts us in a liable position. And it seems to me that we ought to tighten that up. And again, if you want to build something not to code in any way you want for your family, great. But then if you want to sell that to somebody else, it seems reasonable to let the buyer know and to have a piece of paper that they're acknowledging that. How is that onerous in any way? I mean, I don't see any onerousness to that. It seems like the responsible thing to do by the seller, and it's certainly the responsible thing on the part of the county if we're going to have this in our code, in our ordinance, to actually require it and make sure it gets into the file. So I think there's a few things we need to do to just kind of tighten up how we're implementing the existing ordinance, and I would be supportive of a moratorium over 3,000 square feet. I think the grading is definitely problematic as well, but you know, the way the ordinance is written right now, it actually is incumbent upon the building inspector to be looking at those plans that either include grading in the building permit or has a separate grading permit, and looking at the way things are being built and ask the questions, do I need to include a grading inspection? Do I need to include an electrical inspection? And that's already written in the ordinance as a discretion on the part of the building inspector. Hopefully that can be done better. I think we've been kind of missing the mark on some of that. But again, I'm not interested in adding a lot of onerousness to the ability of people to build homes. Because I mean, I think that's at the heart of it. The principle here is that we're short housing. And we need to be encouraging people to do all kinds of things that are reasonably safe for the occupants to create that housing. And I have been a long supporter of actually allowing for our waterless toilets, composting privies just right out of the gate as a way to increase our housing stock, because those sewage requirements, et cetera, really do constrain. I mean, you're building a tiny home for $30,000, but by the time you do the sewer hookup and everything else, you got another 30 or 40 grand. Suddenly the whole cost is doubled. So we're not getting as many ADUs and tiny homes on properties as we'd like. And with SB 9 now, almost all residential parcels can almost automatically ministerial add a second unit or an accessory dwelling unit, things like this. But it's still the sewage requirement that really constrains it and makes everything so darn expensive. And I have seen a lot of responsible owners with composting privies and waterless toilets. And when we suggest that septic systems somehow are God's gift to sanitation, they're not. They are polluting groundwater tables all over this county, where they're put in way too close to springs and streams because the weather testing window doesn't open very long, and when it does, it's really not saturated soils. And when you get saturated soils, we've got a lot of failing septic systems that pollute our springs, our streams, and the ground. Whereas a waterless toilet doesn't do that, right? It's just a matter of handling things safely in that process. So I'm a huge advocate for actually increasing the ability of being able to do that. And I think right now, you're able to do that as long as you have a septic system. Then you can put in a waterless toilet or whatever in another unit. Is that correct, Director Ford?
You don't have to have a septic system.
You have to be able to put one in. The site has to be
able to
compatible
accommodate it.
to. You have to have had a leach test at the very least, or soils investigation, something.
Correct.
At any rate, I think those things would be great. But that's just my thoughts at this point. I think I'm actually in line with Just about all of you probably on some level here, so.
All right, so speaking of in line, we've got Supervisors Bushnell, then Wilson, then Bone, and then I would like to get to public comment. So,
Thank you through the chair. So I first of all want to make informed decisions, and I would like to see this come back with some accurate information on if we've done stop work orders, how many problems have we had. Admittedly, this one issue with that this came up with the house that's all we've been talking about. There were issues with the department didn't do some things that they were supposed to, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we do our own job, maybe this kind of things wouldn't happen, and I know you're working on that. But I don't want to make decisions based on reaction. We're reacting to something, one thing, and I want to have informed information come back to us on, I asked you yesterday, have we done stop work orders besides the one? And that information wasn't readily accessible yesterday. Well, I want to know that before I make a decision. I don't want people that are following the rules and doing the right things to suffer because one person did not, or two. And so before I make a decision on change, I would like to have it come back with all that information that's pertinent. And then I want to get a commitment from you that, we're doing our job so that, that maybe would take care of the entire problem.
okay, Supervisor Wilson?
Thanks. I have a question. And then, in the ordinance, it says the county health department shall prepare regulations which specify the type, design, and number of sanitation, bathing, and washing facilities to provide at each dwelling site. Such facilities shall not be required to be placed within the dwelling, and the design and use of maintenance and standards of gray water disposal treatment systems. Has that occurred?
I think the health department continues to develop regulations to
Okay.
look at various types of disposal facilities. The most recent has to do, I think there is provisions for gray water systems. There are provisions for waterless toilets, for composting privies. But the fundamental issue that kind of is the hang-up right now, as I understand it, is the need for a septic system overall in case any of those other things go awry, that the fallback is to put in a septic system.
That you know of, do you know of any other county that has an owner-builder ordinance that has a way or an exception to uniform building code?
I don't. We can research that and then bring that back as part of additional information.
Okay. I mean, I think when we say, I don't think uniform building code for most of the state is an urban-rural divide. I think that's why it's called uniform building code. Yeah. And so I think we're unique in that, and Humboldt County is unique in so many ways, and I appreciate this one too. I mean, I have to say, I lived in a teepee, in Salmon Creek some years ago. So I get this. I mean, I want to say real clearly, I have these concerns and some criticisms with association with this, but ultimately it was to build affordable housing for folks and make some accommodations to make some housing more affordable. But one of my points is and I think Supervisor Madrone said it fairly, probably better than I did, which is if you can afford to meet uniform building code and the site it's obtainable, and I think we have an obligation to promote that. I mean, I ultimately. Because there are a lot of good reasons why we have it, or why we have uniform. What we're trying to balance is there are occasions and creative ways to create housing that that is, that's not doesn't fit into uniform building code. And we have to be, do our best to accommodate for that too. And I'm glad we're going to get some public comment on this, and I'm glad we're having a robust discussion about this. But ultimately, I think the board, we have some differences on this, but we're trying to ultimately create housing and have housing. So with that, I'm happy to listen to public comment. Thanks.
And Supervisor Bone, then we'll go to public comment.
And I'll